What was supposed to be a routine appearance on CBS Sunday Morning turned into one of the most shocking live interviews in television history. As global superstar Jennifer Lopez found herself blindsided by a host who came not to talk, but to tear her down. From the moment the cameras rolled, it was clear this wasn't going to be your typical morning show fluff piece. Dressed immaculately in a cream-colored blazer, Jennifer arrived prepared to promote her latest project. Polished, gracious, and ready with stories. But host Tony Dokoupil had something else in mind. Instead of starting with a warm welcome, Tony opened with a jab. Some critics are saying you're past your prime. How do you respond to that? The atmosphere froze. Crew members glanced at each other in disbelief. This wasn't curiosity. This was a hit job. Jennifer, ever the professional, stayed composed. I've had a career that's lasted over 3 decades because I evolve and challenge myself. My work speaks for itself, she replied with a calm steeliness. But Tony kept escalating. He attacked her box office numbers. He questioned her music relevance. He pushed the idea that her best days were behind her. And yet, Jennifer stood her ground until he crossed a line no one could ignore. "Let's talk about your personal life," he said smugly. "You've had a string of high-profile breakups. What does that say about you as a person?" The room went dead silent. Jennifer leaned forward, eyes locked on him. "Excuse me, what did you just say to me?" Tony didn't back down. He doubled down. "Don't your fans deserve to know if there's something about your character that makes it hard for you to maintain long-term relationships?" What followed was not just a response. It was a reckoning. I've been in this business over 30 years. I've faced every kind of media scrutiny. And I've always shown up with professionalism, even when others haven't. But what you just did wasn't journalism. It was a personal attack meant to humiliate me. She wasn't yelling. She didn't need to. Every word landed like a punch. If your goal is to have a real conversation, I'm here for it. But if your goal is to tear me down for views, then we have a problem. The control room froze. Crew members openly stopped filming. Security stepped closer to the stage, and Tony. His next words would ignite what would go down as one of the most infamous moments in live interview history. Tony's next move would be the spark that lit the fuse and turned a tense interview into a full-blown televised meltdown. Instead of acknowledging the valid points Jennifer had just made, about respect, about professionalism, about boundaries, Tony laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not an awkward chuckle, but a smug, dismissive laugh that sent a wave of shock through the studio. Jennifer, he said, shaking his head like a scolding schoolteacher. "I think you're taking this way too personally. This is television. We ask the hard questions other people won't." Jennifer blinked. For a moment, even she seemed stunned by the sheer arrogance. "Are you seriously telling me I'm taking personal attacks too personally?" she said, her voice tight with disbelief. "Tony, do you hear yourself right now?" But Tony was doubling down, convinced he still had control. He leaned forward with Fox Gravitas, as if channeling the spirit of hard-hitting journalism. "What I asked was a legitimate question about patterns in your public life. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews." That line hit the studio like a grenade. One crew member audibly gasped. Another would later say he could see Jennifer's hands trembling, not from fear but fury. Then Jennifer stood up. No drama, no theatrics. Just a sudden, commanding rise that sent a jolt through the entire room. "Stop the cameras," she said, calm, clear, unmistakably final. Tony, still misreading the moment, rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on, Jennifer. Sit down. You're being ridiculous." Jennifer turned slowly. Ridiculous. Her voice now carried the weight of 3 decades in the spotlight. "I'm being ridiculous for expecting basic human decency from a professional interviewer." Then she turned to the crew, ignoring him completely. "I want the cameras off. This interview is over." Tony finally began to realize he'd lost control. You can't just walk out of an interview because you don't like the questions. Jennifer turned back, her eyes sharp as ice. Watch me. But Tony couldn't help himself. He made one final, catastrophic mistake. Fine, he snapped. Maybe this is exactly the kind of behavior that explains your relationship issues. Maybe this is why people say you're difficult to work with. Silence. Not just quiet, total stillness. Jennifer stopped mid-step, turned, and this time the fire in her expression was joined by something colder, something lethal. What did you just say to me? Her voice was low, controlled, deadly. Tony tried to salvage his ego, but it only made things worse. I'm just saying. If you could take a little criticism, maybe you wouldn't have such a hard time maintaining professional relationships. Jennifer narrowed her eyes. Professional relationships. She repeated, slowly. Are you actually suggesting that my response to your unprofessional behavior reflects on my character? Tony stammered, defensive. Maybe you need to learn how to take feedback without getting so emotional. That word, emotional. The word women in power here every time they dare push back, and that was it. Jennifer Lopez, who'd been told she was too emotional by underpaying directors, manipulative execs, and lazy journalists, had had enough. The studio didn't erupt. It didn't need to. Jennifer didn't yell. She didn't cry. She walked out. And in doing so, she didn't just end an interview. She ended Tony Dokoupil. Emotional, she repeated, her voice suddenly laced with something deeper, not just anger, but the weight of 30 years of being dismissed, undermined, and reduced to a stereotype every time she spoke up. Then her tone dropped, low, controlled, and lethal. Tony, I want you to think very carefully about your next words. Because what you say next will determine whether this situation gets resolved, or whether you bury what's left of your professionalism. But Tony didn't hear the warning. Or maybe he just didn't care. Either way, he went in for the kill. Look, Jennifer, I get that you're used to people treating you like a princess, but this is real journalism. If you can't handle it, maybe you should stick to the fluff shows. The ones that ask what you had for breakfast and your favorite lipstick shade. The arrogance in his voice was unbearable. In one sentence, he had dismissed her intelligence, mocked her career, and insulted her humanity. Jennifer just stared at him, unblinking. And then she delivered the blow that would turn this from an uncomfortable interview into a viral reckoning. Tony, she began, her voice calm, steady, deadly. I've been interviewed by Barbara Walters, Oprah Winfrey, Anderson Cooper, real journalists, people who asked hard questions about my work, my choices, even my personal life. But you know what the difference was. She paused, letting the silence stretch. They treated me like a human being. They asked questions with purpose, not malice. They held me accountable, yes, but they didn't try to humiliate me for sport. That's not journalism, Tony. That's ego. Tony opened his mouth to cut her off, but she raised a hand. I'm not finished. The studio froze. Everyone was watching. You want to talk about professionalism? Let's talk. A real journalist prepares. They research. They listen. They ask tough questions that serve the audience, not their own insecurities. A professional doesn't weaponize questions just to make themselves feel powerful. She took a single step forward. Her voice dropped to a whisper. What you did today, that wasn't journalism. That was a power trip. And the saddest part is, you actually think you won something. Now Tony looked rattled. For the first time, the smugness cracked. But instead of stopping, instead of apologizing, he doubled down. You know what, Jennifer? He snapped, voice rising. Maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe the problem is you've been surrounded by yes men for so long. You can't handle it when someone finally tells you the truth. The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun. He had just suggested, to Jennifer Lopez, that her success was the result of delusion. That her empire was built on people too afraid to challenge her. She didn't explode. She didn't yell. She simply shifted. Something in her expression changed. The fire was still there, but now it was colder, sharper. "Tony," she said quietly, "do you honestly believe I've sustained a 30-year career as a woman of color in this industry by being surrounded by people who lied to me? Do you think I've headlined tours, produced films, sold millions of albums, and built businesses while being delusional?" She gestured to the studio crew, now visibly uncomfortable. "Look around, Tony. Look at your own team. Do you see respect on their faces? Do you see anyone here who thinks what you're doing is good journalism?" And she was right. The crew couldn't meet her eyes. A few had started whispering. One had discreetly pulled out a phone, likely to alert CBS management. Something had gone very, very wrong. But Tony still couldn't stop himself. "I don't need approval from my crew. And I don't need it from you, either. This is my show, Jennifer. And I'll run my interviews how I see fit." She blinked, and then laughed, a low, cold laugh with no humor in it. "Your show." Her voice was calm again. But now there was something dangerous behind it. "Let me tell you how television actually works. Yes, your name may be on the rundown. But this show only exists because people watch it. And they watch for compelling conversations, not for ego-driven takedowns." She reached for her purse. Slowly, deliberately. "What you've done here today, it's not compelling. It's not interesting. And it's certainly not the kind of thing that builds audience loyalty." Tony's expression shifted. Panic now crept into his voice. "Jennifer, wait. Please. Let's just sit back down. Let's finish the interview. Properly." She paused mid-step, turned back. And in the deadliest tone she'd used all morning, she asked, "Properly?" Jennifer's eyebrows arched sharply. "Tony," she said, voice like flint striking steel, "do you realize everything you've said here today has been recorded? Every word, every tone, every moment." She took a single step toward the studio exit, then paused. "Do you understand that executives will see this? That future guests, and your own colleagues, and the network itself will watch this footage? And most importantly, that your treatment of me today says absolutely nothing about me, and everything about you." She turned toward the door, but Tony, now visibly unraveling, rushed to block her path. "You can't just leave, Jennifer! We have a contract. There are legal obligations here." Jennifer froze, then turned slowly, her expression unreadable. "Legal obligations." Her voice dropped, cool, deadly precise, carrying the authority of someone who has read, negotiated, and enforced more contracts than Tony could ever dream of. "Tony, I fulfilled my legal obligation the moment I walked onto this set, prepared for a professional interview. You violated your professional obligation the moment you decided to ambush me with a character assassination." She stepped closer, locking eyes with him, and her next words sliced like a scalpel. "And if you or anyone else wants to talk legalities, I suggest you review the definition of a hostile work environment. Because what you created here today might qualify." The words hit like a slap, so calm, so measured, so unmistakably damning. Tony paled. "So now you're threatening me?" He snapped, his voice rising, cracking with panic. Jennifer didn't even blink. "I'm educating you, Tony. There's a difference. Though given your confusion between journalism and harassment, I can understand why you might not grasp it." She turned again toward the door. But then Tony made a catastrophic mistake. He reached out and grabbed her arm. The studio erupted. Gasped chairs scraped back. The sound engineer reached for his radio. Camera operators backed away. Instinctively distancing themselves from the moment, everyone now understood was no longer just uncomfortable. It was serious. Jennifer didn't yell. She didn't flinch. She just said, very clearly, "Don't touch me." Then again, louder and sharper than any mic, "Pop. Not. Put your hands on me." The entire room froze. Security appeared within seconds, already alerted by crew. They took one look. Jennifer near the exit, calm but fierce. Tony standing there like a man who had just watched his career implode in real time. "Mom?" Is everything all right here? The lead guard asked, his voice calm, and notably directed only at her. Jennifer adjusted her bag on her shoulder. Her tone was composed, her words razor sharp. No, it's not. This interview is over. And this man, she gestured toward Tony without so much as a glance, seems to be having trouble understanding that. The guard immediately stepped between them, placing a quiet but immovable barrier. Jennifer turned back to Tony one last time. Tony, I want you to think very carefully about what just happened, about the words you chose, the tone you used, the way you treated another human being, because this wasn't journalism. It wasn't entertainment. And it certainly wasn't professional. She paused at the door and delivered the final, cutting blow. There are journalists who ask tough questions because they want to inform. And there are people who ask cruel questions because they want to feel powerful. Today, you showed everyone in this room, and everyone who'll see this footage, exactly which one you are. And with that, Jennifer Lopez walked out of the studio, out of the ambush, out of the narrative Tony tried to trap her in. Behind her, the room was silent. Crew members exchanged looks, still stunned. Tony stood motionless, eyes wide, lips parted, as if trying to reverse time with sheer will. But the damage was done. The aftermath within hours. The footage was circulating inside CBS, flagged as a potential HR incident. By morning, it was the talk of the industry. Tony Dokoupil found himself in front of a panel of CBS executives, forced to explain how a simple interview with one of the most respected entertainers in the world had spiraled into a PR disaster. He had no good answers. Jennifer, she moved on, gracefully, powerfully, unshaken. Once again, she had proven that no matter how loud the disrespect, she walks out with her dignity. They're left with the wreckage.